What if I told you that in 1932, the Australian government deployed actual soldiers armed with Lewis guns, the same machine guns used in World War I, against an enemy they could not defeat? An enemy that didn't fire back, didn't use strategy in any conventional sense, and stood about 6 feet tall on two legs. I'm talking about emus. Big, flightless, absolutely unbothered birds. This is the story of the Great Emu War, one of the most absurd, hilarious, and surprisingly well-documented military operations in modern history. A war where the birds won, and honestly, it wasn't even close. To understand how Australia ended up declaring war on birds, we need to go back to the early 1930s. The world was deep in the grip of the Great Depression. Economies were collapsing, people were desperate, and in Western Australia, things were especially rough for a particular group of people: former soldiers. After World War I, the Australian government had encouraged veterans to take up farming in remote parts of Western Australia, particularly in the wheatbelt region around Campion and Walgulan. These men had survived the trenches of Gallipoli and the Western Front, and now they were being asked to tame some of the harshest, most unforgiving land on the continent. And for a while, it sort of worked. The veterans cleared land, planted wheat, and tried to build lives for themselves and their families. But farming in Western Australia was brutal. The soil was difficult, water was scarce, government subsidies that had been promised were slow to arrive or never came at all. And then, just when things couldn't seem to get any worse, the emus showed up. Now, let's talk about emus for a second. These are not your average birds. The emu is the second largest living bird on the planet, right behind the ostrich. They can stand up to 6.5 feet tall. They can run at speeds of over 30 miles per hour. They have powerful legs that can tear through fencing like it's made of paper. And perhaps most importantly for this story, they travel in enormous groups. We're talking about herds of thousands, sometimes tens of thousands of emus. Every year, after their breeding season, emus would migrate inland, moving toward the coast. And they discovered something wonderful along the way: the farmers' wheat fields. These beautiful cultivated fields of golden grain were basically an all-you-can-eat buffet laid out across the landscape. The emus didn't just eat the crops, they trampled them. They broke through fences, which then allowed rabbits to pour in and cause even more damage. The destruction was catastrophic. Farmers were watching their entire livelihoods get devoured in real time. The ex-soldiers turned farmers were furious. They had survived a world war. They were not about to be defeated by birds. So they did what any reasonable group of frustrated veterans would do. They called in the military. The farmers lobbied the government aggressively. They wanted machine guns. They wanted soldiers. They wanted a full-scale military operation to deal with the emu problem once and for all. And surprisingly, the government said yes. In October of 1932, the Royal Australian Artillery was deployed under the command of Major G.P.W. Meredith. He was given 2 soldiers and 2 Lewis guns, along with 10,000 rounds of ammunition. The mission was straightforward: go to Western Australia, find the emus and eliminate them. Simple, right? Major Meredith and his men arrived in November, and almost immediately, things started going wrong. The first engagement was near Campion, where a group of about 50 emus was spotted. The soldiers set up their guns, took aim, and opened fire. The emus scattered in every direction. A few were killed, but most simply ran away at incredible speed, disappearing into the bush before the soldiers could adjust their aim. The Lewis gun was a weapon designed for trench warfare, meant to mow down rows of soldiers advancing across no man's land. It was heavy, it jammed frequently, and it was mounted on a tripod that made it nearly impossible to track fast-moving targets. The emus, it turns out, were very fast-moving targets. They zigzagged. They split into small groups. They seemed to instinctively understand that spreading out made them harder to hit. It was almost as if they had their own military tactics. A few days later, the soldiers tried a different approach. They set up an ambush near a local dam where over 1,000 emus had gathered to drink. This was it. This was going to be the decisive engagement. They waited until the emus were packed together, a massive concentrated target. Meredith gave the order to fire, and the gun jammed. By the time they got it working again, the emus had scattered into the surrounding scrubland. Only about a dozen were killed. 1,000 emus had been right there, practically standing still, and the military had managed to take out roughly 1% of them. After this fiasco, the soldiers tried mounting a Lewis gun on the back of a truck so they could chase the emus across open terrain. This sounds like it might work in theory. In practice, the truck bounced so violently over the rough ground that the gunner couldn't aim at all. The emu simply outran the vehicle over the uneven terrain. Not a single emu was killed during these motorized pursuits. Not one. As the days dragged on, the results were embarrassing. After nearly a week of active operations, using thousands of rounds of ammunition, Major Meredith's unit had killed fewer than 100 emus out of an estimated population of 20,000 in the area. The media caught wind of what was happening, and the coverage was merciless. Newspapers gleefully reported on the military's failure. One ornithologist famously compared the emus to Zulu warriors, saying each one could absorb multiple bullets and keep running. A member of the Australian House of Representatives even joked that the government should award medals to the emus for their bravery in the face of machine gun fire. Major Meredith himself reportedly expressed a grudging admiration for his feathered adversaries. He noted that if the military had a division of soldiers with the bullet-carrying capacity of emus, they could face any army in the world. By mid-November, the initial operation was officially withdrawn. The government pulled the soldiers back. The emus had won the first round, but the farmers were still desperate. Their crops were still being destroyed, so they lobbied the government again, and incredibly, the military agreed to go back for a second attempt. This time, Meredith and his men returned with a slightly different strategy. They were more selective in their engagements, choosing their battles more carefully, and they operated over a longer period. The results were marginally better. Over the following weeks, they claimed to have killed around 986 emus, though these numbers were likely inflated. The military reported using almost 10,000 rounds of ammunition, which works out to roughly 10 bullets per confirmed kill. For context, soldiers in World War I averaged about 7,000 rounds fired per enemy casualty. So the emus were actually harder to kill per round than human soldiers in a world war. Let that sink in. By December of 1932, the second operation was also wound down. The government quietly withdrew the troops and tried to move on. The emus, however, did not move on. They kept coming back, year after year, continuing to devastate crops across Western Australia. The farmers continued to request military assistance in 1933, 1934, and 1943. Each time, the government declined, not wanting to repeat the public embarrassment. Instead, the government eventually adopted a different approach. They put a bounty system in place, paying farmers and hunters for each emu they killed. This turned out to be far more effective than the military operation. By 1934, farmers were claiming over 57,000 bounties in a 6-month period. Turns out individual farmers who knew the land and could hunt quietly were far more effective than soldiers with heavy machine guns. The government also invested in better fencing, eventually contributing to the construction of massive pest exclusion fences across Western Australia. Some of these fences stretch for hundreds of miles and are still maintained to this day. As for the emus, they're doing just fine. The species is not endangered. Their population across Australia is estimated at somewhere between 600,000 and 700,000. They remain a proud symbol of Australia, literally appearing on the Australian coat of arms alongside the kangaroo. There's a popular legend that says the emu and kangaroo were chosen for the coat of arms because neither animal can easily walk backward, symbolizing a nation always moving forward. Whether or not that's entirely true, there's a beautiful irony in the fact that Australia proudly displays on its national emblem an animal that once defeated its military. The Great Emu War has become one of history's most beloved absurd stories. It's been the subject of countless memes, documentaries, video essays, comedy sketches, and even proposals for feature films. It endures because it's genuinely funny, but also because it reveals something deeper about the relationship between humans and nature. We often assume that technology and firepower can solve any problem. The emus proved otherwise. Sometimes nature simply refuses to cooperate with our plans, no matter how many machine guns we bring. So there you have it. The Great Emu War of 1932. a conflict where the Australian military deployed trained soldiers and machine guns against flightless birds, and the birds came out on top. It's one of history's strangest true stories, and honestly, every time I read about it, I find a new detail that makes me laugh. If you enjoyed this video, smash that like button. It really does help the channel more than you might think. If you're new here and you love weird history, fascinating stories, and the occasional tale of birds defeating armies, go ahead and hit that subscribe button and the bell so you don't miss what's coming next. And I want to hear from you in the comments. What is the most absurd historical event you've ever heard of? Is it wilder than a country losing a war to emus? Drop your answer below and let's see what bizarre corners of history we can uncover together. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.